Cinder Fall is only 1/4 of a villain. In the last video about Mercury, in order to gather some footage, I had to rewatch some of Volume 3. I never noticed it before, but in that episode that includes all the flashbacks, everyone has an established backstory or motivation. Emerald and Mercury are the obvious ones. They get both backstory and motivation, and in a sense, you could say their backstory, Emerald being on the streets or Mercury killing his father, is their motivation for joining Cinder. Obviously, with Adam and Roman, we don't get their full backstory since Adam's was in his character short as well as in Volume 6, as we see his brand, but we do get some information about Adam's current motivation. He wants to go back to Mistral, most likely to take out Sienna in hindsight, before getting forced to join Cinder. Even if for them we don't get a full backstory reveal, we get enough for now. And these flashbacks cover everyone but Cinder, and today we're gonna discuss where her other 3/4 have gone.
Hello everybody, it is Calxiyn here. If you guys enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe, become patrons over on Patreon to help us support the channel, and follow me over on social media. Today we're gonna talk about Cinder, and I hope you guys are ready.
Some of you are probably already wondering what I mean by 1/4. For this series, I made a list of villain qualities, so to speak, from the internet, from classes I've taken, and my own opinion of what makes a good villain. Especially in the older volumes, Cinder is good at attacking the heroes and forcing them into making choices. But forcing the hero into making choices and continuously attacking them are not qualities of a villain. They are qualities of a conflict. You may be wondering what I mean by that, and what I mean is, in a story there are different types of conflict. A person v nature conflict has to also force the hero into making choices and be good at attacking them. Cinder has the same amount of effectiveness as a tornado or a blizzard or a natural disaster, but unlike those things, humans need personality and backstory and motivation. That's why I say that Cinder is only 1/4. She has the conflict part, but so do many other things. She does not have the person part that is required for a villain or any human character. Now, obviously, it would be a bit hyperbolic to say that Cinder could be replaced with a tornado. She can't, so we can move on. I was watching Unicorn of War's video about Genlock and the term mystery fetish came up, and that's honestly why I think so many fans like Volume 1 to 3 Cinder. There is definitely a mystery fetish at play. She's domineering and mysterious. She's so in control, skilled, and conniving. We want to know more about her. We think she's cool. We think she's hot. But now, with Volumes 4 to 6, people don't want the mystery anymore. They just want to fucking know. Going off script for a minute, because I didn't really plan to say this, but it sort of makes you think of dating a little bit. Like if you're going on a date with a girl, right, and it's been like 1 to 3 dates and she has a mysterious vibe, and you're like, okay, like that's interesting, but by dates like 4 to 6, you're just sort of like, okay, like listen, enough's enough. For us to continue our relationship, for me to be emotionally invested in you, I'm gonna have to know more about you. I don't think that evil for the sake of evil is good, and even kids shows go further with their villains. I think it's worth pointing out that evil for the sake of evil is what the Grimm are, and so this really doesn't work for RWBY. And I don't think that we have to look too far to see backstory, motivation, and personality introduced in a couple of lines. Even without bringing up an outside example, how they did Emerald and Mercury was great. We got introduced to their personalities first, fell in love with that, and got their backstory later. And so it just baffles me why they didn't decide to include anything about Cinder's backstory in those sequence of flashbacks, because it was great. But like I said, similar to Mercury, we're getting into the fixing part now, and unlike Mercury, I think that there are more opportunities for this to be relevant in the future. By this, I mean a bit in Knight's Chronicle that caught my attention. The disdain for those weaker than her, and jealousy for those with natural talents. That's how we're bringing foils and mirrors back into this. If you guys watched the Mercury video, you would know that the entire video was basically that Yang foiled Mercury, and there was a very missed opportunity that they will probably not be able to get again. But when it comes to Cinder, I think there's still a lot of opportunities in the future. So let's get into the meat of this. Jaune and RWBY are foils. Cinder and Jaune are mirrors. Cinder and RWBY are foils. I'm gonna start with RWBY and Jaune first because if you guys can pick up on it quickly, it'll be very clear how Cinder connects to both of them. Jaune starts off with 0 affinity to battle. He has to fake his way into Beacon, and even though he's intelligent and is able to come up with strategic plans, etc., he can't fight at the start at all. He is garbage. RWBY, however, is the complete opposite of Jaune. She does have an affinity for battle, and arguably she does have some natural talents because of her speed semblance. This is a side note, but I don't really believe in natural talent when it comes to sort of skills, quote unquote, we can say. So like fighting or singing or like playing the piano, just stuff like that. I personally don't believe in that. RWBY still needs to work for what she has. She still needs to work hard. Maybe her progress will be a little bit faster, and maybe she'll surpass her peers a little bit faster because she has a certain affinity towards fighting, but she's not like, it's not like she popped out of the womb and she's like a perfect 10 out of 10 fighting skill. However, when Cinder speaks about natural talent, I think that at least my mind goes towards semblances. You can train yourself to become a better fighter. You can train yourself to evolve your semblance. But at the end of the day, what you're born with is what you have. Someone like Emerald, I would argue, has a much better semblance than someone like Crow. And semblances are something that you are born with. If you have a shitty one, there is no way to exchange it. You can only improve the one you have. But if the one you have is garbage anyway, there's not much you can do about that. We're gonna talk about that more in a few minutes, but if Cinder is jealous of those with natural talent, it could be possible that she started out like Jaune. Garbage. She's jealous of those with natural talent because she never had any. So we can only imagine how she feels about RWBY, the child prodigy, with the added natural advantage of silver eyes. Explore that, and I think that you have some interesting backstory and motivation that could come out of that shines through using RWBY as a foil. This definitely could have been done in previous seasons, but now that RWBY can use her silver-eyed power, better late than never. Because I think this could really bring Cinder to an interesting place. RWBY has a good semblance. She has these silver eyes. She has an affinity for battle. And even with the maiden powers, if RWBY can still beat Cinder, that would literally drive her crazy. And I think that that would be really fun. And so there's a really strong foil there. RWBY, who as a 15-year-old is super, super strong, whereas Cinder, as whatever age that she is, has had to work all her life, and now even the maiden powers aren't enough. But now we go back to Jaune. I think that Jaune and Cinder are mirrors. They reflect each other at the core. They are at the core the same, even if their personalities are very different. Maybe we could call it a cracked mirror. Cinder and Jaune are reflections of each other, but they have gone down two very different paths. They started at the same place, but have now differed. If Cinder disdains those that are weaker than her, plus the other stuff from before, I think it would be compelling if Jaune and Cinder were similar in that way, that she started out like Jaune, trash, and had to work extremely hard. There's something that I quickly want to mention here. Cinder's semblance is not dust manipulation. Cinder's semblance is dust with a lowercase d. Dust, dirt, sand, and things like that. When you think about the metaphorical implications of that, things get a lot more spicy. Post-editing Cal would like to mention that this fits in a lot more with the Cinderella idea. Covered in dirt and cinders, her semblance would be moving around particles and dirt. I feel like that in a way, Cinder could look at Jaune and see her past self, which is why she goes after him and plays with him and stabs Weiss in front of him. He picks on him. I think it would be interesting that in her twisted way, that she is torturing Jaune because she hates herself. She hates her past self, and when she looks at Jaune, that's what she sees. The connection with Jaune, them being two sides of the same coin, starting at the same place but becoming different, brings an interesting connection to Pyrrha. Pyrrha, who helped and nurtured Jaune to be better, and Pyrrha, who threatened to steal away the power Cinder saw for herself, as desperately needing to be strong. In a way, Pyrrha brought out the very, very worst in Cinder and the very, very best in John. And much like RWBY, Pyrrha was born with a very strong semblance. Obviously, she had to hone it and learn how to use it, but it is another natural-born advantage, which would probably make Cinder even angrier that Pyrrha dared to have that and also take the maiden powers when she has enough strength, but Cinder doesn't. I think what's even more interesting is the idea of distorted desires. In Volume 1 and 2, Jean has sort of this distorted view of strength, this very toxic view of strength, but he's able to get out of that. I think it would be interesting if Cinder couldn't. If Cinder was nurtured and helped like Jean, maybe she would have turned out to be a good person, but somewhere along the way the opposite happened. Her distorted view for strength only grew and grew and grew. And without the maiden powers, nothing was ever good enough. And now with the maiden powers, nothing is ever good enough. She has almost this distorted view of strength and being perfect, this distorted view of perfectionism and what strength truly is. And I think that this ties in nicely with the Cinderella backstory, just because obviously Cinder is based off of Cinderella, and in the story, you know, there is the abusive stepmother and stepsisters. I think it would be interesting if in Cinder's own upbringing, nothing was ever good enough. Like, whether it was her strength or her intelligence or whatever the case, nothing was ever good enough. It's sort of like, you know, if a student gets all A's in school, but their parents are like, okay, well, why isn't it an A+? Like, or something like that. Like, that sort of toxic mentality could have really affected and impacted Cinder. And that's what makes her obsessed with this strength and obsessed with getting better and obsessed with trying to get the maiden powers. But now that she has them, if she can, to going back to what we said before, beat RWBY with them, then she's not strong enough yet. I think if the show could just explore this, use those foils and mirrors, we could get something really interesting out of Cinder and see a whole new side of her, a vulnerable side, because I think everything we talked about is very sort of an internal mental struggle and very vulnerable. And obviously she wouldn't show that side to her enemies, but maybe with Neo, we don't know. Maybe with Neo, they could bond over their backstories, whatever those are. I think if they decide to show this and explore this, Cinder would have her other 3 forts.
Thank you for watching, and thank you to our wonderful patrons over on Patreon who support the channel. Their names will scroll through now.